Hey, everyone. Before we get started with this episode of the podcast, we wanted to talk about this up front. We're recording this on late Wednesday night, and right before we started to record this podcast, news broke about Malcolm Simmons. And for those of you who aren't aware, who hadn't heard yet, this will be going out early Thursday morning, so some of you may be hearing this for the first time. Story came out on Wednesday night, reading this here from our friend Nathan King at Auburn Undercover. Auburn sophomore receiver Malcolm Simmons was arrested Wednesday on charges of domestic assault with strangulation or suffocation, according to recent records from the Lee County Sheriff's Office. Simmons' bond is set at $20,000. Right up front, we're going to talk on this podcast a lot about media days and some other stuff from the event. And I'm sure we will get into some lighthearted topics along the way there, but we wanted to go ahead and address this up front because this is deeply, deeply serious charges being levied against Malcolm Simmons, who obviously had a breakout season last year as a freshman. He was Auburn's number 3 receiver, and you just wrote about him a little bit in my story on Jourdin Crawford on Wednesday, talking about freshmen and immediate impacts. Malcolm Simmons was expected to be a big piece of Auburn's offense this season. So this is a very, very big story that could have a pretty big impact on the season. Like I said, these are very serious charges. You don't want to speculate. You don't want to say anything on one side or the other. But this will be something that I'm sure the process will need to be played out, and it could have a very big impact on Auburn football this season. But more than that, this is, again, very, very serious, just on the human side of this, and we will see how it goes. So we wanted to just go ahead and say that up front in case, something in the podcast you may hear and say, wait a minute, or like, hey, why aren't they talking about this? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, right before we recorded, this broke, and number two, it's something that is, I think, so serious and so important that it needed to kind of be detached from the show and talked about, by itself.
Yeah, and I want to add, Justin, I don't feel comfortable. I feel like it almost trivializes the story to talk about the impact it could potentially have on Auburn's football season, or what it could mean for the wide receivers or anything like that. Maybe at a point where there's finality, and there will be a day to discuss the football implications of this story, but I think it's not the time. Not
important in the grand scheme of things, for sure. And anyway, that is something that we will continue to keep an eye on and monitor. Obviously, very late breaking. It'll be developing over, I'm sure, these next few days. And again, it comes. We have not talked about this yet. I'll say this up front as well. We haven't recorded a podcast since the Tahad Pettiford arrest. Tahad Pettiford came out and made a statement on that of the DUI arrest from a few days ago. I know John Cohen was asked about it on Monday in Atlanta. He talked about it some as well. Looks like Auburn is going through that process there, and then I don't think we even mentioned the DJ Barber thing because that was kind of all of a sudden. But Auburn redshirt freshman linebacker DJ Barber was arrested about a little over a week ago, on charges of trafficking marijuana, unlawful possession of a controlled substance, unlawful possession of drug paraphernalia, and he was kicked off the teams the next day. So, again, these are very important things, these legal things, that go beyond, and the impact go beyond, well beyond sports. And again, sports are important. If you wouldn't be listening to this if they weren't important, but obviously there are much, much bigger things to this. And again, we don't want to. I think Dan said it perfectly. You don't want to trivialize. You don't want to, just make it seem any different than it is. This will be something we have to continue to monitor. I think the Pettiford situation as well. You continue to look at that and go on. And, you can talk about the sports impact of it one day, but right now in the immediate aftermath, when things are this serious, it's definitely not the time or place for that. So with that being said, we are going to go up here right after the intro drop to the episode. So appreciate you guys listening. It's the Auburn Observer podcast, episode number 500. 500. Half of 1,000 of these bad boys. Some of you have been around since the very beginning. I was actually talking to Painter about it, by the way. Painter wishes you all out there in Radio Land well. He's having a great time a few days after his wedding. It was incredible to be a part of that over the weekend. We were talking about how bad the audio quality was for the first few that we did when we recorded them in his apartment with very minimal equipment during COVID. The podcast today, number 500, the audio quality is not going to be anywhere near that. But it is a remote show. It is kind of the classic Observer format, before we moved on and sold out into our professional studio days. But Justin Ferguson here in Auburn, Alabama. Grateful and thankful that you are along with the ride here for episode number 500. Joined, as always, by my co-pilot, Dan Peck, who is still, as we speak, recording this late Wednesday night, holding down the fort in Atlanta, Georgia. Dan, how we doing?
Justin, ahoy! It's great to talk to you from. I have sequestered myself in the small room. I am annoying the journalists that are still working well into the night here on various stories at SEC Media Days, and it's just been a really exciting and illuminating week about the different storylines that you can expect to see played out this season. In the SEC.
Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know, the small room, the electronic media room, is actually the Dan Peck room. He basically runs it for 4 days. Not to get too nerdy and too inside baseball here with,
I think people would be into learning more about sort of the how the sausage is made at media days.
They want to learn. They want to know more inside Dorkfest.
That's right. Inside more Ballapalooza, if you will. But it's
So here's the thing. The main stage, the thing we see this year on the field at the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta. The main stage, the podium where you see the coaches' interviews and the ESPN sets, Feinbaum, all that good stuff. That is it. That is kind of the main media area. In other years, like in Hoover, it was always in the big ballroom. That's where kind of the magic happens, and then the things you see on TV, and then off to the side, you've got player interviews, breakout interviews going on during there. The electronic media room. Dan's probably, a decade old, maybe a little less than that, since it came around. And it was kind of made for people to get their own stuff that in an environment that would be easier to get than the scrum interviews for the players. And it's different because of the filming rights and all that with the main room. It's kind of
important to note here, Justin, that the big room was for print journalism.
Yes.
And the electronic and the small room was for TV and radio for a long time, and then that gradually shifted to where
I spent more time in the electronic room on Tuesday than anything else.
Right, and it gradually
shifted
to where
electronic media.
The big room is for folks who want to be on SEC Network.
Yes.
with their
which
questions.
I guess I would have gotten on SEC. Like I did Feinbaum on Tuesday afternoon.
There you go.
Always a good time with Paul. And I did ask a question to Hugh in the main room, so I guess I did get on SEC Network a couple of times. It wasn't my intention. I wasn't going out, trying to get this face on television. But that's usually I'm like the farthest away from that idea. But yeah, but anyway, so the electronic.
It'd be a great gimmick if you did Feinbaum in like a luchador mask or a Daft Punk helmet.
I could do a luchador mask. That'd be fun. But yeah, the electronic media room. And they pull, everybody gets it. Like, they have, it's kind of a traditional podium table type of press conference. Raise your hand, ask questions in the microphone, kind of thing. And it's never been necessarily a highly attended room. I think most people stay, like a lot of folks bunker down in the main room or on Radio Row and stay there, pretty much all day. The electronic room, though, it's kind of the hipster room, Dan, and you have owned that area, really for the last few years, because you just park in there, and I don't want to take words out of your mouth, but you can kind of explain it here. Like, if you're there, you're away from the glitz and the glamour of the main stage, and like you can get a lot of questions in if you park in there for the majority of the day.
Right, and I think it's a great way to get some information that maybe slips through the cracks because it doesn't go out on national television the way that stuff in the main media room can be disseminated. I think there's also, sometimes there are groups of reporters or a beat for a program that doesn't attend media days in gigantic numbers. It can be sort of lightly attended from a particular, from the folks who cover a particular program, and I think that it's appreciated that I'll ask questions to Mississippi State players or South Carolina players, and it's and that helps me get some questions up to your Auburn players and your Auburn coaches, and it's appreciated, and I'm happy because in the case of, I mean, you don't know what you're going to get out of some guys.
Oh, yeah.
Brendan Thompson was the Mississippi State wide receiver that formerly played at Oklahoma, and I got some great information about Jackson Arnold out of a player like that. Jeff Lebby, who isn't Mississippi State's not on Auburn's schedule,
right.
but as Jourdin Hill pointed out, he was Jackson Arnold's lead recruiter at Oklahoma, and had has a ton of insight into Auburn's new starting quarterback, and you can get details like that a little bit easier in the electronic media room, and I've had a lot of success and a lot of fun being able to ask questions of folks, being able to fire at will here in the small room.
Yeah, we don't have any surprise lined up for the 500th episode of this podcast. We didn't record with Painter. We didn't do it. Although several of Painter's groomsmen and friends were trying desperately to get to be a part of the podcast this weekend. That was pretty funny. Maybe the surprise, Dan, is it took us so long to get one out with scheduling. That might be it. It made you really wait for it. But Dan, we're going to talk media days. We're mostly Auburn, obviously, and I do want to talk to you a little bit about some other stuff you picked up on because you're there all week. We're recording on Wednesday night. You'll come back Thursday. By the way, real quick, our plan is to record. So we're recording this on Wednesday night, putting it out on Thursday. That's the main show this week. The premium show this week, I'm planning on doing the mailbag that way. So we're going to plan on recording a mailbag episode on Thursday night. So get your questions in. Dan and I'll answer them, and once he gets back from Atlanta, and get ready to go for that on Friday. So just a little scheduling note there. Dan, Auburn at media days. I thought the biggest takeaway I had, the biggest narrative here was it felt like starting Monday night with Hugh Freeze at the ambush event in Atlanta, I thought the big goal for Auburn coming in was they wanted to pivot the narrative around this football program this summer by focusing on the 2025 football team. And some of you might be out there thinking like, oh, well, duh, that's what you do at this time of year. You're previewing the season. But when you've had the summer that Auburn has had, with the recruiting angle from it, with the struggles that they've had here, with the, I don't even know if I want to call it controversy, but just the I don't know, kind of the ongoing storyline around revenue sharing and Auburn's approach to NIL and all that, which was addressed again, Hugh Freeze's golf game, which was mentioned and hinted at several times throughout it, like we thought it would be. Auburn came in with a mission. Hugh Freeze and his players came in with a mission to say, hey, we want to talk about this team. And I think the big takeaway for me, Dan, is something we've talked about in light of the recruiting stuff and other stuff going on, and just Auburn in general. Auburn football in general, when you've had 4 straight losing seasons and things aren't going well as a program, the only thing that fixes it is winning. I think John Madden once said winning is a great deodorant. It is. And I think Auburn, like Hugh Freeze, attacked this media days even more so, I think, than his first 2 at Auburn, and saying, hey, we know we have to win, and we know winning is got it. Like there's pressure. He talked about expectations. He talked about what Auburn fans want to see, and not shying away from the fact that they should have been a better football team last year, and they dang sure better be a better football team this season. That's the vibe I got.
I think so, and you listen to Hugh Freeze, you listen to the players. It does feel like it's both an opportunity to change the narrative from some of the topics that have been top of mind this offseason for Auburn, like you said, like seemingly middling recruiting returns so far, or Hugh Freeze's hobbies, those sorts of storylines. Like it did seem like this week in Atlanta was an opportunity to refocus the attention to a very pivotal 2025 season for this Auburn team. And that's, you can look at the pressure on Hugh Freeze. I mean, there's a ton of pressure all over the roster for these guys because it's, you think about some of these guys are in their third year, and Keldric's a great example. Mm-hmm. Keldric talked about how it was his third year at Auburn. He had been a winner in his football career consistently leading up to Auburn, and it had been kind of jarring, the results these first two seasons for him, and he's desperate to reverse that course before he leaves Auburn, and I think he understands. He didn't drop too many hints about this talking to us, but the fact is it's probably his last season in college football, right. And so he's got about 12 games to reverse that course before the season's over. And I think for Auburn, I think that it was important not to come across as overconfident, right? Mm-hmm. As arrogant in any way, but you can tell this is an Auburn team, both with Hugh Freeze and the three players they brought that feel very comfortable about what they've got going into this season.
What do you make of the talk about expectations? And Freeze came out and said, we think we can be competitive in every game this season. We think I think there was one. I want to get the exact quote right here. He said, "I truly believe." That in the playoff run, we're going to be in this discussion because I love this team. We have to stay healthy, and we need the ball bounce our way a couple of times instead of against us, I'm sure, but that's our full expectation. We embrace the fact that this is what Auburn should be in those talks year in and year out. Obviously, the players, I heard Keldric Faulk talk big about how he feels like, hey, we have a team that can go out and dominate. That's I don't want to say it's typical boilerplate SEC media days talk because it's not. It is, talk is cheap. We've said that for the last 5+ years for Auburn football. But I will say, Dan, that it is a departure. Because earlier this summer, there was a moment around the Regions event where Freeze said, hey, well, I think we need to get into a bowl. He was talking to the next round. We got to get to a bowl game. And there was some pushback, a lot of pushback, some very fierce pushback from Auburn fans being like, is that our aspiration? And I think this time around, where there's the maximum amount of microphones and cameras in your face in the preseason, Hugh Freeze came out and said, well, let's not shy away from that. Auburn fans want to win. They're tired of losing, and they should be, man. Like, we talk about the players being tired of losing, the fans being tired of losing. This is not what Auburn is, right? Auburn is traditionally much, much stronger than this. This is the worst stretch of losing season since right after World War II. And so there's no use in shying away from it. There's no use in hiding it. It is what it is. I think that just Freeze talking like that and being more forthcoming and bolder, I should say, about it. Nothing like crazy. It ain't like he came out there and said, hey, we're going to beat Alabama and Georgia. We're going to go play for the SEC championship. My thing here, Dan, though, is that you had a coach talk like an Auburn football coach should be talking at this point in the year, having that confidence. And it's been a few years since you've been in that position.
When Hugh Freeze was at the golf tournament earlier this year and he suggested that Auburn's aspirations were merely bowl eligibility, I would say that he fired that shot right into the water, right? Like that was not the correct approach to take, and I think
and it kind of felt like a weird one-off because he had not been quite talking like that, but he did. But it was at that moment.
And I think there's been a recalibration since then as far as what the expectation should be publicly. Because I wonder if that was really or if he's playing it close to the vest, and that was sort of a strategic thing.
It just can't be the shucks. We're going to play hard and hope we can make a breakthrough. Like he even said, I wrote about this on, I guess that would have been Tuesday morning's newsletter, the first one about how much he likes his team. And he said it again, Dan. It's like he may sit there, and he did again on Tuesday, and say, hey, we feel like we probably need another recruiting class to be a championship contender type of program in the SEC, which is valid. I think you don't have quite the amount of talent and depth that Alabama, Georgia, Texas, those teams have in this league right now, and you could probably use another one of those. However, you have plenty of talent to go. Like, I look at teams like South Carolina and Ole Miss. I don't know if there's another great example. Those are two really good examples. Those are teams that have been pretty well talked about heading into this upcoming season. Florida to an extent. What I mean by this is like they don't like South Carolina, Ole Miss. We know they do not recruit to the level Auburn does in high school. Florida does more, but like those are two teams where it's just like, okay, we have definitive proof. Missouri was a great example of this these last couple seasons as well. We have definitive proof that you do not have to recruit like a national. You don't have to have a national championship caliber roster in the SEC in order to win 9-10 games, fight for a playoff berth and contend. It's tougher for sure, but it's doable. It's possible, and we know that Auburn's in roster-wise, talent on paper, in a better position than a couple of those teams are. But those teams have been clearly outplaying Auburn here recently.
And I would point out that both of those teams and Missouri, when it was going well, got much better quarterback play.
Correct.
Right? You think about what Auburn, that can be, that can neutralize a lot of advantages that your roster has if you're not getting if you're not getting top level production out of the most important position on the field. And for Auburn, I think it's crucial to think about, like, you look at the schedule. Right, the first 2 years Hugh Freeze was the coach at Auburn, there were multiple games on the schedule. I think both years he was the head coach. There were multiple games on the schedule where you looked at it and you said, the other team has considerably more talent and Auburn's on the road. Like, both of those things were true. You think about A&M and LSU in Hugh Freeze's first year. You think about Alabama and Georgia last year. I don't know if there's a game on the schedule where both of those things are true in 2025 for Auburn, where you feel like Auburn they don't have the benefit of Jourdin Stadium, and they're outmanned and they're outgunned. Maybe Texas A&M would be a game where you could say that this season, but I think that remains to be seen. But the fact is, you don't have that excuse the way you did in the first two seasons, that even if everything broke right, there were some games where it would be a surprise if you were competitive. And I think for Auburn with the 2025 season, you don't have that built in. The idea that even if everything broke right, there were going to be some games that were out of reach for your team. That doesn't appear to be the case when you look at practically every game on the schedule in 2025. And I think that's part of the reason why people thought the sights were set too low when you just talked about bowl eligibility for this Auburn team.
You mentioned quarterback play and that being a big deal. And I mean, we'll talk about Freeze and his comments and just kind of the narrative there throughout this discussion. But talking specifically about Jackson Arnold, Freeze made some waves this week when he decided to bring Jackson Arnold on, because officially Jackson Arnold hasn't been named Auburn's starting quarterback. Now, he probably will be, and we all knew that coming out of spring ball. But they brought him to media days. He was brought to media days, and there was a question in the electronic room getting his day started on Tuesday about bringing Jackson Arnold. And I'm paraphrasing here, but Freeze basically said, "Hey, if I think he can be the guy, like I want him to be the guy, you got to bring your guy." And I thought that was really interesting, because it could have been very easy. And we've seen this happen in the past at Auburn and other schools, where even if you have a clear leader in the clubhouse with your quarterback position, you probably aren't going to bring him to media days unless you're absolutely sure. And you're probably not going to bring him to media days, Dan, if they're not a senior or a returning guy. So the thing about Jackson Arnold is that he's not a returning starter, or he's not a returning player at Auburn, and he's not even a senior either. But Auburn made a point to bring him to SEC media days. And media days, as we talked about, that has had so many quarterbacks in it. You bring one if you got one. And Hugh Freeze sent a very clear message, I thought, by picking him, that, hey, they got one. So what did you make of what you heard from Jackson Arnold and the talk about Jackson Arnold in Atlanta because as the closer and closer we get to the start of the season, the more and more it's like there's a lot of pressure on all this stuff that Auburn needs to improve and get better on. A lot of it's going to fall on the shoulders of that quarterback.
I thought the most interesting stuff I heard about Jackson Arnold all week, not to toot my own horn, but it came from my question to Brent Venables in the electronic media room. Hearing Brent Venables go into great detail about the quality player and person that he lost in Jackson Arnold, when you think that's a guy who, I mean, look, he could have been very polite and just sort of dismissive of
there, and I'm not trying to say coaches do that. Well, I'm not singling anybody out there, but I did hear a question to Kirby Smart about a player who left Georgia, and he wasn't really down to talk about it. Hugh Freeze was asked about Michael Riley in the main room, and it was a very short, quick answer, just a very I guess a very automatic professional answer, but. Yeah, go on, because I was not here for this. I had already left Atlanta by the time this was going on.
And our pal Nathan King has written a story with a lot of these quotes, and I believe I believe AL.com has the video of Brent Venables answering me about Jackson Arnold, and he goes into great detail about Jackson Arnold being a really high-quality player and person who comes from a great family. He named Jackson's parents as, and said this is a kid who was not put in a position to succeed last year for reasons that weren't Jackson's fault. He singled out the injuries on the offensive line, the dysfunction in his own coaching staff, and he sort of expressed, I mean, look, I think Brent Venables in Oklahoma like the situation they have at quarterback with John Mateer, another quarterback who hasn't taken a snap for his team but still represented his program at SEC Media Days this week. But the fact that he was incredibly candid about what went wrong with Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, and he included in that he believes Jackson Arnold's going to play football for a very long time at a very high level. He was incredibly complimentary of the situation that Jackson Arnold is in now at Auburn, and including compliments to Hugh Freeze and the Auburn coaching staff. And this is, I mean, I don't think there's no strategy in being dishonest about this. If you're Brent Venables, there's no real
no one's forcing them to do
There's
that.
no upside. I think it's commendable that he doesn't take the tactic of burying guys on the way out, and he instead is willing to offer praise for his former players. But the fact is, he went into, he really gushed about Jackson Arnold in a way that surprised me as the person who asked him the question, and it suggests that Auburn, hearing Jackson's former teammates and his former coaches, including Brent Venables and Jeff Lebby, talk about him like they still have the same confidence that people had the day Jackson Arnold signed with Oklahoma out of high school. It suggests, it gives you even more confidence that Auburn has maybe found something really special at the quarterback position.
I want to read this quote specifically from Venables about this, and he said, quote, "I hate what happened. We wanted to keep him and tried to keep him, but he just needed a fresh start. I don't want to speak for him. He was wonderful. I was never once disappointed in him." He went on to say, everything around him wasn't helping him be successful. Talking about his time in Oklahoma, Venables said, he had no chances in some ways under the circumstances. He'll be a different player. Arnold talked about how there's going to be no animosity when he goes to Oklahoma. Other Oklahoma players are very complimentary of him. That's cool. I feel like, it feels like SEC Media Days these days are like not as buzzy as they used to be. And maybe that's just the changing landscape of media, and maybe that's me getting older and more boring or whatever. But it feels like there's so much like where people want to like force a story or force a controversy or something they can make a cool little graphic on and put it on Twitter. This was like honesty, like guys, like, and it doesn't strike me the same way as this player, at least when it comes to the coaching staff and I don't know, maybe the fan. I don't know what the Oklahoma fans, but we've talked a lot. And when Auburn got Jackson Arnold, the pitch was like verbatim the Bo Nix playbook, right? And when Bo Nix left Auburn, I think if everybody had some truth serum, maybe not his former head coach at Auburn, but I think everybody else involved would have been like, you know what? Hate it didn't work out for him there. Hope he's going to be successful at his new spot. We'll see. And I think I'm not saying Jackson Arnold's going to be a Heisman finalist and, win all these games and be a first-round pick and an NFL starting quarterback. But what I am saying is it's a dude who's Gatorade National Player of the Year. And this is a dude that did not succeed last season at Oklahoma. Some of that is on him. Some of that is on what was happening at Oklahoma. And like Venable said, he needed a fresh start. I mean, that's part of what the transfer portal has to offer. And not only is he getting a fresh start, Dan, he's getting a fresh start where even though, I mean, let's be very honest here. Go look at Jackson Arnold's passing numbers last season. They're towards the bottom of qualified quarterbacks in the FBS and the SEC, right? It's not pretty what happened last season with him. He got benched. It wasn't pretty. But not only has he made it and got that reset, he's come to a place at Auburn where his new head coach is bringing him to SEC Media Days. His new teammates are talking him up as well. And it's not, hey, look at this guy that we're having to salvage and it's some reclamation project. We don't know how good he's going to be this season, but you got to think it's got to do something for the confidence of a quarterback who went through so much last year where it was, I got that reset, I'm in a different place, and these people believe in me. And it's also got to feel nice that the guys I left, they don't hate me. They're not wishing not wishing bad luck on me or anything like that.
And I thought Venable's, something else that he mentioned there was he commended how Jackson Arnold handled the benching. Right, he said that was one of the toughest moments of his football career thus far, and to see him handle it with grace and with dignity, I thought really that's another thing about Jackson's character that seemed to stand out to Brent Venables. And not to list the things that went wrong for Oklahoma last year, but I do remember being at SEC Media Days, and the big storyline before the season last year was that Oklahoma had 5 new starters on the offensive line. I believe by the end of the Auburn game, 4 of those 5 new starters are injured. And then you've also got injuries to the wide receiver core, and I think it's going to be tough for a lot of quarterbacks in that situation to find a way to stay on the field and be productive when the team is going through a ton of bad luck all over the offense with injuries. I think it would be very difficult for Jackson to have a productive season at Auburn if Auburn doesn't get the benefit of that kind of luck on the offensive line and with wide receivers when it comes to injuries and availability. And so I think, look, it could turn out that all the conditions are right and the experiment still doesn't work. Like sometimes you change out all the variables and you try it again, and it still doesn't give you the result that you were looking for. But there are ample variables to change with Jackson Arnold and the things around him before you render a verdict, before you decide one way or the other about this guy's college football career.
What you heard from Jackson specifically, Dan, anything stand out to you? I thought there was the question about, it might have been your question about why Auburn and what worked for him. Talking about the RPO game, we mentioned that recently in a mailbag, breaking down how a lot of his balls were the quick strikes kind of stuff, and he wants to be able to push the ball down. Now he's got to improve with that deep ball accuracy from where he was at Oklahoma, but again, Oklahoma had hardly any healthy wide receivers and the worst offensive line in major college football last season, so it was a little tough to throw deep balls on under that. But the fit just has always made sense for me, right? And the thing about Jackson Arnold is that we all knew Auburn was going to need a transfer quarterback this year. That Deuce Knight, as talented as he is as a 5-star, probably wasn't ready yet in a win-now year to go ahead and pull that trigger on that 5-star quarterback. And again, I just kind of keep going back. John Mateer, Carson Beck. Outside of those two guys, Dan, were there any other names that made the or like, oh, that's a clear cut upgrade for what Auburn got in Jackson Arnold? And like even then, I will say I would have been interested to see like Beck. I don't think the guy's going to go to Auburn from Georgia, but stranger things have happened. I don't know how he'd have fit in this offense. I think whereas some other guys in that second or third tier or whatever you want to call it of these transfer quarterbacks, say that second tier of transfer quarterbacks, let's say that. I think while other guys may have had some better stats last season, I think in the context of what Arnold went through at Oklahoma, combined with he's the kind of quarterback that you would want to run this type of offense. Hugh Freeze talked about, and for some reason it became a story on Wednesday from some folks that hey, Hugh Freeze liked Jackson Arnold coming out of high school, and I don't think we need to give that oxygen or time of day at all. But no, like, you know, the guy who was the Texas quarterback who threw you know, a ton of RPOs, that quick strike spread game. Yeah, this is the type of quarterback. I wrote about it earlier this week. This Auburn offense is in Hugh Freeze's image in year 3. And he talked about how this is kind of his ideal offense that he's been able to orchestrate here. There are a couple of guys who might have been clear upgrades from that, what they got, but I think Auburn made the most of the situation they found themselves in the portal. Also, considering the fact they've had 4 straight losing seasons, they're not going to be a top destination in the portal for a lot of guys.
Yeah, I mean, the other quarterbacks that I would even put in this conversation that switched teams this offseason, I know there were a lot of Darian Mensah fans out there.
I love Darian Mensah.
I mean,
but that's a big step up.
Darian Mensah going from Tulane to Duke. Caden Salter, was Liberty's quarterback. Played for Hugh Freeze. He's going to Colorado to compete to be Sanders' replacement.
Auburn looked into Malik Murphy, who went from Duke to Oregon State.
Right, but I would still think that and one of the more interesting things I heard from Jackson Arnold was Auburn was on him the day he went into the portal. They had a call, I believe, Jackson Arnold's second day in the portal. Like, I mean, you get the impression. I know that there's this gotcha out there about Hugh Freeze and Jackson Arnold, but you get the impression Auburn got their top target in the transfer portal when you hear Jackson Arnold's story of being recruited by Auburn. It sounds like this guy was Auburn's top priority, and that's something that I think that's a huge benefit for. And Jackson mentioned it's not just the supporting cast. Importantly, when you mention the supporting cast, it's offense and defense. Just a sidebar here, but like the thought that I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to have a gigantic season, but maybe he doesn't need to be the gunslinger that he's been if LSU's defense gets a little better and they don't have to score 50 points a game to win as an LSU offense. Maybe that cuts down on the risk-taking by a quarterback. And I feel like having the confidence of knowing you've got a defense that can help you win every game, that's got to be huge for a quarterback deciding where he's going to go. And you don't really think about that so much. How good is the defense when you're thinking about where a quarterback's going to go in the portal?
And Auburn's defense was ahead of schedule last season. Top 20 in yards per play, top 30 in scoring. We said it a lot. This was a defense that was better than I thought they were going to be in year 1 under DJ Durkin.
And when Jackson Arnold was talking about why Auburn, it was not just that Auburn made it clear he was a top priority. It's not just that Auburn's offense fits what Jackson Arnold does well, but it's that Jackson Arnold feels like he's got a team around him at Auburn, offensively and defensively, that can help him realize his potential as a quarterback.
I also liked he talked about how the fresh start, he said they felt like he needed it mentally for him to go. And yeah, I mean that's the thing, man. Like, he's still we'll see how it works. Like you were saying, you don't know how it's all going to work out in college. You could roll the dice and it come up empty again. But like, this dude was the best quarterback in the country by some at one point in his football career, and so people believe in him.
The top 10 player nationally. I mean, even in places that didn't have him as the top quarterback because he was the same year as Arch Manning. This is a guy who was a top 10, top 5 quarterback prospect from his high school class, Gatorade Player of the Year, and on most of the services, he's one of the top 10 players in the country. And when you're a quarterback who's got those kind of accolades, I mean, more often than not, people have extremely high expectations for what your college career is going to be.
And again, we don't know if he's going to live up to them. Guys fall short of those throughout the history of college football. You can see that with quarterbacks, but it's easy to see why people believe in him and believe that he can be this step forward for Auburn. And there's things we've talked about in the past, right? His ability to run the ball, his efficiency in the red zone. I think those are things when you hear Hugh Freeze talk about what Auburn needs to fix, identifying the fact that, yes, special teams needed to improve with the kicking game, having Alex McPherson. I did ask him about special teams because I was just interested in his take. Really interesting point he made. He talked about having Alex back. I'm not going to be surprised. I'll just throw this in there. Wouldn't be surprised if Towns Magoo's a guy that they use on kickoffs, maybe to help, limit the pitch count, I guess, so to speak, on Alex. He talked about how much he liked Hudson Cock as the new punter. But one of the things that stood out to me, Dan, is that when I asked him this in the main room, Freeze said he thinks they're just a lot faster of a team in general. And he mentioned that in the scope of the linebackers in the secondary earlier this week. But yeah, I think part of the thought that they thought, Auburn struggled in special teams, period. The field position game, the penalties, it was just not very good. He feels like in addition to bringing back a specialist that was really good a couple years ago, adding another punter, and then just adding the team speed, it's just going to be a better team overall, in the specialist unit. And that could go a long way. When you lose the close and winnable games that Auburn does have, I think Auburn's number one priority, as I've said all offseason, Auburn's number one priority is finish drives in the red zone inside the 40 with touchdowns more often than you have here under Freeze? Yes. Am I naive enough or, so set in my analytical ways enough to say that, the special teams game didn't impact Auburn's wins and losses last season? Absolutely not. Auburn could have pulled out some of those games, maybe not just by purely kicking field goals, but there's more that goes into special teams than just kicking field goals.
But I would say upgrading the overall talent level of the roster, it reduces your need to be perfect in some of those games, right? You feel like, even in the first 2 years, even in games where Auburn seemingly had a talent advantage, you felt like Auburn's margins were slim, right? It's not as like Auburn had to throw a no-hitter in these games, but they had to be, in some of them they had to be excellent in order to get the win, and they didn't have the team yet to be excellent. This year's team feels like you have a little bit of wiggle room. You have some space, you have some daylight where you can where you have the freedom to maybe make a mistake and it won't cost you the game. It could maybe you have the overall talent to stay in it and absorb and overcome some of those mistakes.
All right, moving on from Jackson Arnold. Is there anything else you want to touch on with Jackson?
No, that covers it. I think with Auburn's quarterback. There's some other Auburn things we can hit.
For sure. All right, let's move to Keldric and the defense and the talk there. I wrote about Jourdin Crawford. He was probably the freshman we heard about the most on there.
Real quick, because because it'll be kind of jarring to go back. I thought Connor was excellent.
Go.
So, I thought Connor was excellent. I thought he was very physically impressive. I had some people asking me if he was Auburn's left tackle. And I was like, no, that's the center, and both guards are bigger than him, and both tackles are bigger than the guards. So I think, Connor, on top of the fact that he's clearly a very cerebral guy, comfortable leading, and I think that you look at Keldric and Connor as, even though they're not the oldest guys on their respective sides of the ball, they're clearly two leaders on this team, and they're two guys who have played as much football for Hugh Freeze as just about anybody else on the roster.
I just keep going back to the fact of how hard it is to start on the offensive line as an underclassman in the SEC, and Connor Lew has now done that for 2 full seasons. Now he's a veteran. Now I want to know, and again, I don't know this off the top of my head. I haven't done a ton of research. I want to know how many centers in the SEC have more experience than Connor Lew heading into this year, and he's just a true junior.
I'd be interested to know how many offensive linemen in the SEC started games as a true freshman. Because again, you don't see that. You don't see that very often. We were talking about it during basketball season. There's only a handful of freshmen that are in the rotation anymore for these teams because players are extending their eligibility and playing, squeezing every drop out of their college careers. On the line of scrimmage, you're 18, 19 years old. You were in high school last year, and you're competing against
22, 23-year-olds.
Yes, fully grown adults, and the thought that Connor's been able to hold his own in that for a couple of years, and he's going to be the grown adult soon, right? He's going to be the one just as old or older than the ones he's facing. That's got to be a really exciting. Like the thought that Connor's the second half of Connor Lew's football career could be better than the first half. When again, this is a guy who got on the field.
I think it definitely could be.
Most offensive linemen are better as juniors and seniors than they were as freshmen and sophomores. And for a guy who was good enough to get on the field at that position, right? The amount of not just the what you have to be able to do physically, but in order to handle the mental and leadership capabilities and necessities of that job, it's incredibly impressive, and I think that's, again, tough to predict a big season out of a center.
Right.
But I think but if Auburn's offensive line is better, Connor Lew, I think, is going to be a part of that. Like Connor Lew's going to be one of the guys who's a reason why, and he's got two, as veteran as he is, he's got two guards on either side of him who have played more college football than he has in Dylan Wade and Jeremiah Wright, and so I think it's a veteran.
He also talked about how much Xavier Chaplin and Mason Murphy picked up on things really quick, which makes sense for guys who are veterans like that. But you're breaking in two new tackles, but in a way you're not, because those two tackles have played a lot of meaningful major college football at this point.
Right. It's as veteran as the offensive line has been as far as experience at Auburn. And for under Hugh Freeze, at least it's as veteran as the group's been, and it's also he's got a center in Connor Lew who's continuing to develop every year.
All right, Keldric Faulk. Before we get into the football side of it, the story from Keldric Faulk about him giving some of his NIL money to a walk-on to help him out, I think it's a really, really cool story. And I believe
is that Rose? Didn't Rosie?
Yeah, it was WSFA was the first on that one.
Right.
Got to give proper credit there for sure.
Shout out to Rosie.
She
was on the.
I was about to say she was on the drive, wasn't she? Yeah.
She was. Yeah.
I will say this though, Dan. There's so much about modern college football in these days, and the NIL and the a lot of old school fans, or maybe just folks who aren't old school fans, can get tired of hearing about it or think, be against paying players and the wormholes that have developed because of that, and yada yada yada. Keldric Faulk is a great example of kids doing it the right way, and I've highlighted some, as I wrote about Jourdin Crawford recently. He's done some big stuff, back in his Birmingham and his community area with that. Talked about Xavier Chaplin a while back, doing a back to school thing. But Keldric Faulk, I want to read this quote from him because I thought it was really, really cool. He said, "When you receive blessings, it's in your best interest to give blessings to other people. That's what NIL does. NIL has helped me and my family tremendously since I've been a freshman here. Not once has anybody thought about the walk-ons that help us throughout the week. We're preparing for a team on Saturday, and they give the best looks for us to be prepared to play that team. I feel like it was just in my heart to give back to my teammate." That kind of stuff right there, I think there's a misconception with some people. They were like, well, we pay these kids, and they're going to get spoiled, or they're not going to work hard, or they're going to be greedy with it, and yada yada. There's this story got out, right? There are other examples of this that are going behind the scenes. I'm pretty sure, and I'm not saying that this was bad that it came out, Keldric Faulk was completely fine with nobody ever finding this story out. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. But, I just, up front, that's the kind of dude he is, though. And you've heard about it a ton. This is a guy, we talked about him recently on our last podcast. The fact that Highland Home could have a first rounder, it's just, but a guy who still knows where he came from and knows how to help out people along the way. It's a lot of maturity, but of course it's a lot of maturity. This is a dude who went to SEC Media Days as a true sophomore. People have looked at him as a shining example for a reason.
It's a remarkable story of generosity and of friendship and of brotherhood, and it's a really cool detail about Keldric Faulk that he's willing to share the wealth and help out a teammate. I am a little confused because I didn't think we were doing walk-ons anymore. I thought everybody had a guaranteed scholarship in the new era of college football.
I guess it might be on. That might be on the right. Might be a guy who was a walk-on, and we don't know what his situation is now.
And I believe Hugh Freeze even mentioned, the thought that it was a guy who was struggling to pay for school, and Keldric stepped in to fix things. It's a really cool story, and it doesn't seem, I don't know him all that well, doesn't seem out of character for Keldric Faulk, based on the fact that this is a guy who it matters to him. There's that word again. It matters to Keldric Faulk that he's playing at the closest major conference school to his hometown, and that he's not just making good on going from being a small public school kid in Alabama to potentially a first-round pick in the 2026 NFL draft, but he's doing it close to home. He's doing it for the school that is important to him. It's not a sort of, and again, wouldn't fault Keldric Faulk at all if he had decided after last season to take the biggest offer and go play somewhere that maybe was a bigger had a higher preseason ranking. But it was absolutely like, I think it speaks to what kind of person we're talking about with Keldric, that he's willing, not just the fact that he's still at Auburn, but the fact that he's willing to do things like help out teammates that are struggling financially.
With Keldric, came out and then was one of the ringleaders of being a bolder with his thoughts on Auburn football this year. He felt like, he said, "Oh, there's negativity around us." The win total. I thought it was funny that he even mentioned the 7.5 win total. Like he's been reading up on the analytics. But he was mentioned
shopping around for odds. What's going on here?
Well, let's not get him in trouble, Dan. But he said, just like he feels like this team's due to break out. And you mentioned it earlier, Dan. This is a guy that did a whole lot of winning in high school and hadn't done a whole lot of winning in college. And this might be it. If NFL draft boards are to be believed, man's going to be making a whole lot of money, a few months from now, playing for a professional football team. And it's a guy who wants to go out a winner. And he's going to be so crucial. I mean, we're recording this before all SEC picks go out, or the ballots, or I guess the ballots are finalized, the teams go out. Dan, I think this is your first teamer from Auburn. It should be your first teamer from Auburn. Auburn may not have any more than that, but I think Cam Coleman's got a good shot. But this is a special player and a special dude. And while he might not be the most vocal guy in the world in terms of his leadership, he is a guy that has been a leader from day number one. And, he's not holding back. This is a guy that is desperate to win because this might be it for him.
And the fact that he's still here, right? Like the fact that he's desperate to win at Auburn. Like I said, he had options. I'm sure it was a Jerry Maguire situation, and Auburn showed him the money back in December, January to keep him from even considering going into the transfer portal. But this isn't just a financial decision with Keldric Faulk, because he would have gotten paid anywhere, right? I think that he's sticking around Auburn because he thinks the team's pretty good. He thinks that he's got a team around him that can achieve those goals in 2025. And I think that also, Keldric gave answers about players like Malik Blockton getting on the field very early. He singled out Amaris, right? I think you may have asked that question to him, as a matter of fact, about Amaris Williams. I mean, you hear him talk about some of his teammates. He believes he can be part of a really special defense. That's not Keldric Faulk and the 10 Dwarves playing defense. It's about Auburn having real high-level talent all over the field on defense, and the kind of talent that gives Keldric Faulk a chance to shine.
So, Keldric said, they were talking about playoffs and being in the playoff hunt. Here's his quote from that. He said, "We have the talent and the coaching staff to do it. Coach has brought in so many players that he views can take us over the top. He brought in his own coaching staff and his own players. He has everybody he recruited on a team. Doesn't have a bunch of players where this coach recruited this, now he has to bring in bits and pieces. No, he has everybody he wants on the team. I feel like just being that, we have everything we need to be in the playoffs. We just have to go out and do it." Here's my thing, Dan. Confidence, you don't want to get crazy with it. You don't want to overdose on confidence at this point in the preseason, especially when you're a team that struggled as much as Auburn has. But it's like we were talking about with Hugh Freeze up front. No one's going to get mad at you for going out and saying, you know what, we think we're going to be a good football team. And that might be common sense, or that might be like, okay, who cares, talk is cheap, whatnot. But if an Auburn player comes out and says, hey, we know what people are saying about us and we think we're going to be better than that, and hey, we may even think we can make it to the playoff, that's the kind of confidence you need to have. Because here's my thought. I'm not an amateur sports psychologist, but I feel like if you come into the season thinking that you don't have that kind of potential, that you don't have that kind of ability, like you don't have that kind of talent in your room, you're going to die in the SEC. I don't want to speak for too many teams on Auburn's schedule, Dan, but let's just run through them here real quick. I would say Baylor, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, definitely Georgia, Alabama, maybe Missouri, Kentucky and Vanderbilt, maybe a little bit of stretches at this point, but a good chunk of those teams that we mentioned, teams that you're going to have a good year, they have those playoff aspirations. They have those playoff dreams. They have those playoff hopes. So if you don't feel like you can reach that point already, and you're not at least portraying that type of confidence, I don't see it working for you out this year. So good on these guys for coming out and saying, hey, even if it may sound silly to some, that's what they believe in. For an athlete, I think that's a good thing to have.
I think it's similar to Jackson Arnold. It's not just about one player's ability. It's about the unit as a whole. Can the 11 guys working together allow you to achieve what you're setting out to do? For Keldric, his willingness to single out some of his teammates. I thought the Jourdin Crawford answer was really interesting. He seemed to indicate he's got a lot of confidence in. And that's a player we haven't talked about too much this offseason, right? As a guy who could break through. There are any number of reasons to think Jourdin Crawford, a player who's relatively new to the sport of football, a basketball player that switched over late in his high school career, started at the mid-major level, came to Auburn after spring practice was over, and backed up Jalen McLeod for a big chunk of the year. No one's really thinking about his breakout potential. Keldric Faulk, he yelled that into a megaphone. That Jourdin Crawford is going to be someone who makes an impact on Auburn games week in and week out this year. And boy, would it make Keldric Faulk's job easier if defenses had to worry about other pass rushing threats on this Auburn defense. And that's whether it's linebackers like Riddick, whether it's Amaris Williams taking a step forward, whether it's Jourdin Crawford making good on his potential. I think the thought that if someone else can emerge as a very real threat to go after the quarterback, you're still going to have to worry about Keldric Faulk.
You better worry about Keldric Faulk.
Yeah, there's still that guy, and then if you suddenly have to worry about somebody else also, making an impact in pass defense, that could make things even tougher for Auburn opponents.
Yeah, Jourdin getting a lot of hype. Amaris as well. We've talked about Amaris. Yeah, Jourdin. Dan, let's use this to quick sidebar. I know he wasn't there, but he was mentioned a few times in media days. Jourdin Crawford. What do you think about Jourdin Crawford in year two? We saw a pretty good jump from year one to year two in the SEC from Jalen McLeod. The track record could be there. Now, Jourdin's a different sized player from Jalen McLeod, a little bit different. But the flashes that Jourdin showed, the sparks that he could provide, he needs to be more consistent for sure, and he'll have more opportunities to do so if he's the guy next season at that buck position. But what do you think about Jourdin heading into year two?
I thought he got better every month last season.
Yeah.
It felt like. I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to say that it was game by game, but I thought that you looked and he had a larger role and was a bigger part of the defense in every subsequent month last season. And the fact that and this is. He got close, right, on a lot of sacks where you think maybe he's. If the timing can get a little bit better, if he can improve physically, if he can just get another year of experience under his belt, he could be somebody knocking at the door of a really big season. I won't be shocked at all. I think that's if you're looking for like a breakout candidate, if you're looking for somebody people aren't really talking about very much on either side of the ball for Auburn, Jourdin Crawford strikes me as somebody that I mean, even going into this week, I might have wondered about Jourdin Crawford as an answer there, and then hearing Keldric Faulk tell people, put people on notice, right, that it's going to be a really big season for Jourdin Crawford, or Jourdin Crawford has the potential to have a really big season in 2025. I think that's that's a name to look out for.
I mentioned Jourdin Crawford again. You can read this at the Observer if you haven't
yet. No relation from what we understand between Jourdin and Jourdin.
And Jay. Think about it. Auburn could have three players at all three levels of their defense next season with the last name Crawford.
And this is when I point out that we have a caller on the drive named Crawford, and Drew has mistaken him and thought that he said his name was Crawdad before. So if you want to do something with the Crawdads on the Auburn defense, you got a couple guys that I think between and there was ample buzz about Jourdin Crawford this week too, right? Both Keldric and Hugh Freeze had some questions about.
Heard a little bit from heard a little bit from Connor Liu, too, about him, as saying, like, as a guy, he saw him in the spring. You can read the whole newsletter at the Observer. I wrote it on Wednesday afternoon. Should have another newsletter out on Thursday afternoon for media days just because of the modified schedule this week. But Dan, Jourdin Crawford got a lot of hype, and Hugh Freeze said in terms of instant impact defensive tackles as a freshman, Robert Nkemdiche is probably the only other one that he said that's like, yeah, and Robert Nkemdiche was, I don't know, the unanimous number one player in the country coming out of high school. But Jourdin Crawford's a whole lot of fun, and even though he wasn't the highest-rated player in Auburn's 2025 class, he wasn't even the highest-rated defensive lineman in that 2025 class. The thing about him, here's the quick pitch, and you can read the rest of it on the Observer. In his high school career, Jourdin Crawford had 38 sacks. Dan, he is listed at 6 foot and 339 pounds.
This is a big fella, and it's important to remember too when you're talking about the interior defensive line. It's great if you've got 3 or 4 guys that can play 55 plus snaps each. It's tough at that size to be that kind of player and still be that effective.
You want to Freeze talked about it at the defensive tackle spot. You're going to want about a half dozen dudes who say, give me 15 or 20 and I'm ready to roll.
And that's a position, as Don Dunn has explained to me on multiple occasions, that's not a position where you go to the bench and slug some Gatorade and get back out there. When you're it's like a starting pitcher. When you're done for the week at that size on the defensive line. And so for Auburn to have, for Auburn to bring back Malik and Bobby Jamison-Travis, Malik Blockton and Bobby Jamison-Travis, who were both, I think two of the brighter spots of that 2024 season. I thought that those two guys were as ready to mix it up at the line of scrimmage on defense as they were. You bring in some portal acquisitions, we'll see, right? It almost feels like defensive linemen in the portal are magic beans. And maybe
there's a lot of Trill Carter hype last year. Didn't quite click. Isaiah Rakes ended up being a pretty good pickup for Auburn in terms of it, like Dorian Mausi at linebacker, but just like, it's a mixed bag. Auburn getting Dallas Walker, James Ash, Jay Hardy. Those are guys that make sense to join the rotation for Auburn. None of them have high-quality power conference experience, though.
But the thought is, if you can get a handful of snaps out of those guys and your true freshmen, it lightens the load for Blockton and Jamison-Travis. And if those guys don't have to play as much, they're going to be more effective in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
And that's something where, if you have to, and it's important, I think more on the front seven than anywhere else on the football field. If you can't go to your bench and bring in some relief, it's going to be tough for those guys to be at their best in the fourth quarter. And Hugh Freeze mentioned the defense needing to get better on critical downs and the defense needing to get better in the fourth quarter. And I think improving the depth at some spots, especially on the defensive line, could very well allow you to take those steps.
One more other thing I wanted to talk about from Auburn's, time at SEC Media Days, and you can, again, read this as well at the Observer since I'm doing some Observer plugs right now, auburnobserver.com, $6 a month or $60 a year. Thanks for listening to the free podcast. We'd love for you to join us for the mailbag later this week and all the newsletter writing. Auburn opening the season with Baylor. How much of an impact is that going to make? That's a question I asked everybody on Tuesday. I thought I got some interesting answers, Dan. Some weird kind of stats. It might be coincidence. It might not be. But how about this? Since Gus Malzahn became Auburn's head coach, Dan, Auburn has had 12 season openers. They had a winning record every single time they opened the year with a power conference opponent. That's 7 times. In the 5 seasons that they didn't open with a power conference opponent, 4 losing seasons, 1 winning season. The only winning season, 2017, they beat Georgia Southern, got that really bad offensive game against Clemson. Obviously, they found it, turned the corner, and won. The last 4 seasons, though, Dan, Auburn has opened with pushover games and have had losing seasons. I'm not saying those things are directly correlated, but there does seem to be some sort of effect and some sort of impact when you have to be sharper from week 1 than instead of having to go, play, Alabama A&M or UMass or Akron in week 1.
And not to relitigate the 2017 season, but Kerryon Johnson gets hurt in the opener, and Auburn doesn't have him in that Clemson game. Mm-hmm. And Auburn in 2017 was a different football team when Kerryon Johnson wasn't available. When Kerryon wasn't on the field, that team struggled to reach the same kind of heights that they did when they had Kerryon. As for the 2025 Auburn team, being able to, you've been asking about the fact that they're opening with Baylor and not a mid-major or a paycheck game at Jourdin. We've wondered before if Auburn's if the ease with which Auburn dispatched its paycheck game opponents last year maybe allowed for a false sense of confidence as to what this team can do.
I think you've seen that a few times these last few seasons.
I think that I keep thinking about the Alabama A&M game,
yep.
right, where you came away thinking this could be one of the great big play passing offenses in college football based on the fact that they had a slam dunk contest, or because it's timely, a home run derby against a team like Alabama A&M, and a week later it was malfunction central against Cal, and I do wonder if we've said it before, like if Auburn had opened last year against Cal instead of having a week to tinker after beating a paycheck opponent, maybe you get a different Auburn performance in that game against Cal. We'll test that theory this year because Auburn opens on the road against a Baylor team that a lot of folks think can make noise in the Big 12, and it's hard to describe how deflating a loss would be, right? Like, I don't think it's a must-win game. The season doesn't hinge on Auburn winning against Baylor, but the fact that if you can't win that game, I don't think you can do anything in the 2 weeks after Baylor, right? In the two games against paycheck opponents to sort of calm the nerves of folks. It's gonna take you get a shot at redemption after Baylor, but it's in Norman, Oklahoma, a couple of weeks later, and nothing you can do between that Baylor game and that Oklahoma game is gonna convince people or change minds, even if you deep fry the two teams that you play in between Baylor and Oklahoma. So it's hard to overstate how big that game is on Friday night at the end of August for Hugh Freeze and for Auburn.
I'm just interested to see, and it might not be tangible, and it might not even matter, what happens those 60 minutes on that Friday night in Waco, but I'm interested to see fall camp. By the way, starting in less than 2 weeks. It's coming up quick here, folks. Off season's over. We're done.
July now part of the fall.
Yes, correct.
I
think I'm going to have to start officially calling it like preseason camp or something like that, because this is, we can't really call it fall. It's going to be 9,000 million degrees.
And summer camp has connotations, right? That's for s'mores and for campfire songs and stuff like that. But it's it's fall camp. It's a month before the game on August 29th, and Auburn.
I just wonder. I want to see how much that changes. If again, these can be buzzwordy. These cannot matter. But like, does the energy feel different? Is the focus different? It's got to be, because like you can't coast. There's no cruising into it. You got to be hitting that thing full speed. And even if you lose, you got to be able to be good enough to pick up the pieces. It's not going to be one of those things where you get fool's gold at the beginning, and then when you finally get that first test, you don't know how to react to it, or you can't adjust, or it really shows you who you really are. All right, Dan, to wrap up this podcast, I want to talk for a little while here. We've talked to Auburn. Is there any other Auburn things you want to hit before we go?
I think we've covered most of the bases. One more thing. Jackson Arnold didn't seem to want to list his receivers, right? Out of concern that he might forget somebody. But he had, because he was asked about his receivers quite a bit, and he said he didn't want to single one guy out. He's excited about the potential of this group, right? And it's tempting. Now we're not Jackson Arnold, so we will single people out. If it's Eric, if it's Cam Coleman, Horatio is a guy that I think a lot of people are.
I'm big on a Perry Thompson year 2 breakout.
And there's a Perry Thompson year 2 breakout. I think that the receiver core, while it may seem obvious that that's going to play a big role in a quarterback deciding whether or not to come to Auburn for the 25 season, for Jackson Arnold, it's clear that that the fact that Auburn has turned itself into a destination for top receivers in a way that it hasn't been in program history under Hugh Freeze. It clearly played a role in Auburn being able to go land a quarterback like Jackson.
Let's talk, Dan, about the SEC wide. You have been there from the beginning. I was really only there for Auburn's stretch. I kind of interloped a little bit on Monday and Wednesday at times, but very briefly. I've really just been focused on Auburn. We're heading into Wednesday. There's 4 more teams left, but you've talked with and to 12 of the 16 SEC teams, including a handful of teams that Auburn is going to play this year.
All 4 of the teams going Thursday are on Auburn's schedule. Incredibly, all 4 of them. You got A&M, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Missouri, all finishing up on Thursday. So of the 12 teams that have gone, you subtract Auburn, that's 11. Only 3 Auburn opponents of the 11 teams that have gone through the first 3 days of SEC Media Days.
Yeah. So anything stand out to you specifically? You can go back to Sankey. I did want to talk about. There was the talk about the 9-game schedule and the new push. I think Brett McMurphy reported this earlier on Wednesday that basically the Big Ten and the SEC battling over how the playoff should be formatted, and it's basically the SEC's preferred format of the automatic. It was like the 5 conference champions and 11 at-large bids. That's the SEC's preferred format. The Big Ten has talked about wanting it to be a little bit more like guaranteed spots for all these different conferences. The word from McMurphy, and I hope I'm not butchering this here, was basically like, if the SEC gets their way, the Big Ten will agree to it if they go to 9 conference games. Dan, this kind of seems like what the SEC's wanted to do all along, but they're going to be able to get both of what they want here? What do you think about
it? It seems like there are coaches who don't want that 9th game unless you get some guarantees from the playoff committee, right? It seems like that's influencing. That was Kirby Smart's answer when I asked him about, where are you currently on 8 versus 9, and how important is the Auburn game and continuing the Auburn series for UGA. He said it was speculation that Auburn Georgia would go away if the SEC stayed at 8.
Sankey has said there is that they have ways to protect everything with 8. It's just going to be an even more imbalanced schedule, I think.
Maybe we go to maybe we have a Big Ten situation where we designate the rivalry games that need to be played every year, and we don't necessarily have a uniform number of them across the conference. I'd be a little surprised if the SEC went that way, but if they decide, it does seem like Kirby Smart. In describing his stance on the matter, he seemed to think that if the playoff committee isn't going to properly evaluate things, then there's no reason for the SEC to go to 9 games instead of staying at 8. You have to make sure that adding an extra loss on the schedule for half the teams in the league is worthwhile for the trade-off. And so, it does seem like this is all a leverage play, right? We used to think the 8 games versus 9 games was about trying to get more money out of ESPN by adding an extra week of conference games and being compensated for that. Now it seems to be much more about the college football playoff and how are you going to structure the playoff, how many teams are going to get in, and if the SEC and the Big Ten can't reach an agreement here, then the playoff could stay where it is at 5 conference champions and 12 teams. But it does seem like we're moving towards both expansion of the college football playoff and a 9-game schedule in the SEC, or we're not going to get either of those things.
I did think it was one of the funnier moments of Tuesday where somebody asked Keldric in the electronic room about cutting that game, and he was like genuinely shocked that was a thing. Like, he's like, what? He said they can't do that.
And I sort of look, Keldric's going to play in the Auburn Georgia game this year, most likely, and I don't know how many more Auburn Georgia games he's going to play in.
But again, for a guy who's probably not going to play much longer, to be like, no, you got to keep Auburn. And look, if Auburn, the practical thing, the smart thing for Auburn, considering their recent run against Georgia, might be, no, we don't really have to play Georgia, do we? Do we really have to play Georgia? But no, it's tradition and rivalries. That is what makes that is what separates college football from the other sports. Is what separates college football from just being NFL junior. Is that this stuff matters and this stuff has a lot of history to it. And the further we get away from that, the further we lose the heart and soul of football. I think there's more irreparable damage for doing that in the name of TV and playoff expansion and all that than if kids get paid for their work and their labor.
And there's also maybe the 3D chess way of looking at this, which would be, is it easier to recruit in Georgia if you're Auburn because you have that rivalry with the University of Georgia and you play them every year? And if that left the schedule, would it be more difficult to recruit out of the state of Georgia? Because that's a vital part. I mean, you think about the Georgia players on this team. You think about the success Auburn has had recruiting in the state of Georgia. I mean, the campus is 25 miles from the state line, from the interstate. The thought that, I mean, if you can't, if you take that Georgia game off the schedule every year, it could make it more difficult to convince kids from the state of Georgia to come play at Auburn. So I think there's a, to keep the pipeline flowing, you might want that on top of all the other practical reasons that you would want the Auburn-Georgia rivalry to continue. Maybe it makes it easier to keep the pipeline flowing with Georgia talent on the Auburn team.
You asked Greg Sankey about flag football, didn't you?
I did ask Greg Sankey about flag football, and I asked if the conference is considering it as a sport. If they're and I think the way he described it is they're paying attention to the growth of flag football and the way that it's becoming, maybe the fastest growing girls sport in American high schools, and it's taking hold around the country. The NFL, again paraphrasing Greg Sankey, the NFL is driving a lot of this growth with the flag football sport, and something I've speculated on. It is a way to turn a non-traditional audience into football fans. I would guess that a girl who played flag football in high school is more likely to follow football as an adult than someone who didn't. That's just, I mean, there's no science there, but that would be my guess.
I mean, heck, I feel that way about women who play basketball being more likely to watch basketball and at a professional level, both the NBA and the WNBA. And I think there's some crossover between people who played softball and being baseball fans.
And as the NFL looks to grow the game internationally, I think it also makes sense to try to grow the game with non-traditional audiences, both in the United States and around the world. And so I think that, flag football is part of that strategy. The important thing, Sankey, he said it didn't seem like adding sports was necessarily a priority at this moment.
Yeah, especially with the new scholarship expansions,
in the SEC, but he also made it very clear that and again, using his words, they're paying attention. And it's something that I don't think is out of the question as maybe something that you could see at the college level and even in the SEC level over the next few years.
All right, what else caught your eye so far at SEC Media Days?
Just a couple of coaches I love getting a chance to talk to. I play favorites here, but I mean, I like Brent Venables as sort of an old school football coach, and there's a few of those around the league, right? I feel like Jeff Lebby's a bit of a throwback. I think that the Billy Napier is someone who I've always thought that he's a straight shooter, and Billy Napier telling stories about Steve Spurrier Jr. is an analyst at Florida now, and Billy
Speaking
told some stories about his interactions with Spurrier Sr. since taking the job, and it's real
speaking
cool.
Speaking of coaches that like playing golf,
I mean, the thought that you can have a recruit and a recruit's parents get some FaceTime with Spurrier Jr. with Steve Spurrier when they come to when they come to Gainesville and they come to the Swamp. Billy Napier talked about getting Sunday morning phone calls from Steve Spurrier after games. I'm sure those got easier to take.
Yes.
Towards the end of the season, the first couple of years of Napier's tenure probably wasn't.
First
probably
ones weren't great.
It probably wasn't a thrill after a loss on Sunday to look at your phone, see it buzzing, and realize Steve Spurrier was calling because he wanted to talk. It's gotten a little bit easier, I imagine, for Billy Napier. But no, I think there's something else that I'm struck by around the league. I'm guessing, again, like you said, we're getting the projected order of finish, and the votes. The deadline for the votes has not occurred yet. So we don't know how things are going to shake out. I would guess that in some order, Texas, Georgia, and Alabama are your top 3 teams in the SEC in the preseason. The fact that all 3 of those teams are, I think it's fair to say, unproven at the quarterback position, and yet people feel like those are the top 3 teams in the league. I just wonder if that's what your order of finish really looks like. If all 3 of those teams have hit on their quarterback and they're going to be able to hang in there, especially when you see some other places in the SEC, like LSU, like Florida, like South Carolina, where I think they feel, even Oklahoma, even though John Mateer is new to the conference, there are some places in the league that feel excellent about what they've seen from their quarterback. Not what they've not the the recruiting rankings and what they've seen in practice and the buzz, but what they've actually seen that quarterback do on the field is something really special. And I just wonder, with Texas, Alabama, and Georgia, did all 3 of those coaching staffs hit on a quarterback who's going to have to take a huge jump in experience and see a very different role in 2025?
Yeah. No. Is there a player that's caught your eye, or someone who stands out to you, that like a player or two that you like really enjoyed talking to or hearing from and being like, okay, you might follow them a little bit more closely this upcoming season because of it?
A guy who immediately took over the room and didn't seem to be, even a little bit overwhelmed was John Mateer. Like I thought John Mateer came in and just he exuded confidence. He was joking around. He was having a good time, and just like with Jackson Arnold, the fact that this is a guy who's this comfortable without ever having worn the uniform before. Because he's also won over his team to the point where they feel comfortable bringing him to media days as one of the representatives. Like I think John Mateer, there was already a lot of buzz around John Mateer. I think that he's got fans all over the country who believe he could be. It's a lazy comparison to say he could be this year's Cam Ward, because they both came from Washington State and Cam Ward just had this huge season. But I understand why people look at John Mateer as someone who could be the most impactful transfer quarterback in the country. And Brent Venables and that Oklahoma team, they need it, because we've made a lot of Jackson Arnold's struggles at Oklahoma, but it's not like it got much better when he was on the bench. And it's not like for all the pressure that Hugh Freeze is under, because there are championship expectations at Auburn. When you talk about Oklahoma, you talk about one of the great programs in the history of the sport. They're not used to being out of it several years in a row. It's got to be making it even tougher, because Texas is having a tremendous run of success, while Oklahoma sort of searches for answers under Brent Venables. I don't know how much longer Brent Venables is going to get to be the one searching for those answers. If things don't work this year, I think that there's going to be a lot of discussion about the future of that Oklahoma program. And if anything, the fact that you go out and get players like John Mateer and Jaden Ott to bolster a group, it's going to make it. It's going to make it even tougher for Brent Venables if it doesn't work.
Who are you picking to win the SEC this year, Dan?
I'm struggling with my choice right now, because with Texas, Alabama, and Georgia, you have to bet on a team that's relatively unproven at quarterback. I really like LSU this year. I really think that LSU's schedule, I want to see what it looks like against Clemson, but I think in conference they've got a shot to win every single one of these games. I like the home slate. I love Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's if I had one game to win, and the only choice I had in the matter was that I could have any quarterback currently in college football, I probably would take Nussmeier, based on his ability and based on what we saw from him last season in his first year as the starter. The only other guy to have a 4,000-yard season at LSU and come back was Joe Burrow. And so it's, and Brian Kelly, he's also searching for answers at LSU. I know that the win-loss record has been better than it's been at other places over the last couple of years, but I wonder if he's lived up to expectations as LSU's head coach since he arrived. And if he can't make it work with Garrett Nussmeier, I think that's going to be a discussion too, as far as the future of that program and the direction they're headed. I think LSU's in position to have a big season. If I'm picking it right now, I've got LSU in my top 2. I'm sort of wavering on the other team and whether or not LSU is going to be my champion. I might go Texas LSU as my top two, but I also I count out Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs at your own risk based on the seasons they've had of late.
I keep going back and forth between Texas and Georgia. And my thing was,
I expect Texas and Georgia to be the top two.
Yeah, I think I will probably lean Texas because I think Texas's defense is what's going to be the thing that carries them over the top. They're going to be tested early. I like they have a pretty favorable schedule. Like, they have a couple tough ones, obviously. They got to go to Georgia this year. They got to go to Florida as well. They have a run, though, in the middle where they could, like, hit November with a ton of momentum. So I think I'd go Texas. And I know that's the trendy pick right now, but that might be the move I go. LSU is interesting. I do think LSU is like that. I don't want to say like full-on dark horse, but I do think that's the one where it's like if you're not going Texas, Georgia, Alabama, like LSU makes a ton of sense. LSU, I'll keep an eye on that one. I'm looking at LSU's schedule right now, and it's like, Ole Miss on the road, but they do get South Carolina at home. Bama on the road. I don't know. I keep coming back to that Texas team. Especially if Arch lives up to the hype, And I don't think he's going to be the best quarterback in the league, obviously, this year, but he has. What we did see from him last season was pretty fun. Do you have any other things? Cam Coleman, first team All SEC. I think Keldric's getting in, but Cam Coleman.
I think Cam's in the conversation for sure. Like, it's gonna
be Ryan Williams and somebody.
Yeah, it's gonna be Ryan Williams and somebody. And I could see. I could see Cam.
If it could be true sophomores as all SEC wide receivers.
Anybody else from Auburn you think gets some discussion?
Second team, you're gonna have some possibilities. I'd be interested to see if some of those transfers get love, like Eric Singleton. Like, Eric Singleton would be the one that makes a lot of sense. Xavier Chaplin's gotten some preseason love. Kayan Lee, maybe? Just because of the longevity there?
How about Pleasant has shown up?
Rayshon Pleasant, especially with his kick return game.
Yeah, I've seen Pleasant on some preseason lists.
Yeah, I think pretty highly. Like, I'm interested to see when that rolls out on Friday who makes the cut. But yeah, I think I'll go Texas, and I think Auburn gets 2 preseason All SEC guys first team. I think Cam Coleman's name value and recognition is going to carry him over the top, especially when you have such a big field of votes to dig into.
Seeing the hysteria around, and look, and I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, no one would care about Arch Manning if he had a different last name. I think he's. I think
he's still be pretty good.
That only takes you so far as a prospect before they start evaluating more than just who your parents are. But I think that Arch Manning, it's if he can, seeing the hysteria around him at SEC Media Days earlier this week. It was. There are pictures making the rounds on social media when he's in the big room.
Oh, yeah.
There's an entourage of 25, 30 reporters around him. It's 5 or 6 deep in a semicircle, trying to get answers from Arch Manning, and that's something he's been dealing with since before he got to college football. Like, that's something that people have been talking about with Arch. That attention has been surrounding him for much of his career, and this is a huge season for him. A guy who he's been the presumptive starter all off season long. And it's the first time in his career that he's gotten to be the first teamer for an entire offseason going into this fall. It's just that's I understand why people are confident in Texas, but you're betting a lot on, just like you are at Georgia, just like you are at Alabama. You're betting a lot on potential at the quarterback position.
All right. Let's wrap it up there. Dan, like we said, we will be back tomorrow by the time you listen to this with a mailbag episode. Send those mailbag questions into me. Send them to my email. Shoot them to me on Twitter. Put them in the comments. We'll see them. We'll have some fun with that. Dan, I do want to wrap this up with some thoughts on episode number 500. And we love round numbers, and we love reaching these milestones. The fact that we got to 500 is crazy, considering, as some of you are new. to this. This started as an experiment to get through the COVID season, and it.
But you're going to say this started as a prank.
Yeah, started as an elaborate prank. This was an experiment to get through the COVID season, just to have something to do, have an outlet to write and podcast after my world and Painter's world and others had been turned upside down, including our jobs, during COVID. And what is granted, we're about to enter our 6th season of football and 6th men's basketball season, which has been so successful for us as a business. Dan, it's incredible. Some of you have listened to all 500 episodes. I know you have. Some of you have been around since day one, and we love you guys and appreciate you very, very much for the support to help this get it off the ground. But early in those first few months, not only get it off the ground, but be like, no, this is what we're going to do now. And I'll tell you, Dan, going to SEC Media Days and having the Auburn Observer on a credential and knowing that was something that started from scratch, not saying I built it, not even saying Painter built it. We did a lot of work together, and obviously Dan has been a huge part of what we've done here for the last, I guess, several hundred episodes at this point. But Dan, the thought process that you guys listening made it. You helped build this. Because if I didn't have an audience, if we didn't have anybody listening to us, reading us, subscribing to us, clicking on what we do, sending emails out, talking about us, putting us on the radio, XYZ, we wouldn't get credentialed. We wouldn't be able to cover these things like you pay us to, And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much for helping us get to 500. And heck, man, I would love nothing more at this point in my life, as we currently sit. I would love nothing more to one day say we hit 1,000, that we doubled up, like we hit 4 digits. Like I would have never thought we'd hit 5. I told Painter this. It was like when we started out at the Observer, it was like, hey, if we got 1,000 paid subscribers one day, it would feel like we could just retire. Like it would be the greatest thing ever. Let me tell you something, folks. We're knocking on the door of being like 50% over that. Like 1,500 and beyond right now, paid subscribers. And that means so very much to us. And so anyway, I just want to say, as we wrap up, thank you for getting us to 500. Thank you for listening to all of our nonsense, the highs, the lows, the weird audio.
The even lowers than the lows.
Yeah, even lower than the lows, the highs and the highs. The times where we, had technical difficulties, the times where episodes completely got deleted. That one time Dan had to fake like he was having a live episode with me and have to fill it in the back like ADR off the side. The episode where the episode where the intercom at the Las Vegas airport just was probably the loudest speaker on the entire podcast.
We've done the show from outside the continental United States.
Yep.
Right. We've had adventures all around. Look, this thing from the very beginning, Justin, to borrow a phrase from one of our favorites, this thing has been for the sickos. Right? From the very, very beginning, this thing.
We wouldn't have it any other way. We ain't trying to get rich and famous on here. We just want to give the sickos what they want. And if you've been with us for this long, man, you are absolutely disgustingly sick.
Absolutely. And we love you for it, all right? Never change.